Hey, good morning, WASBO. It is Friday, August 30th. Wow, how did that happen so fast? And the good news is that Money Talks is back. So thank you for joining us. School starts on Tuesday. My goodness. I hope all the buses run on time. I'm sure there will be parents parking in your bus lane. Just, as long as the air conditioning works, the rest you can deal with, right? Um, so our topic today on Money Talks is, well, let's see, you've got a busy couple of months coming up. September is the third Friday enrollment count. October is adopting a tax levy. November, for many of you, is referendum time. So we thought this was a good month to get together and bring in a communications expert and talk about how we meet that challenge. So I'm Mike Berry, Executive Director for WASBO and an at-will employee. I'm reminded all the time by the board. I have to apologize when you look at these our slides here. This is our panel for the day. This is the guys with ties lineup, our panel today. So before all of the powerful women of WASBO start getting on the chat and wondering what's going on with this, all I can tell you is it'll balance out over time. Our leading, um, our highest attended Money Talks from last year was the discussion on Act 20 and what that means for the business office. And that was Dr. Stephanie Leonard from Sun Prairie. So we should learn the lesson that the all-guy panel is not necessarily a big winner for us. But the folks we have here today are experts, and I'm delighted to introduce them. Our co-host, as always, is Brian Adesso. Brian is the Director of Business Services at Menasha. Hey, Brian.
Morning, Mike.
So yeah, we took July off, so we're a little rusty. But hopefully you were practicing yesterday.
All the
Um,
time in the mirror.
I also want to introduce another one of our colleagues, Andy Weiland. Andy is the business manager at Oregon School District, and he is the WASBO Treasurer. He's also WASBO's leading green energy guy, and that got him a panelist spot at the White House earlier this summer, right, Andy?
That is correct, Mike.
So, panelist for Money Talks, panelist for White House. Oh, which is most prestigious in your opinion?
That's a tough call.
I know, I know. Well, you think about it. And then lastly, our special guest is Brian Nickel. Brian was a 17-year employee at Howard Swamico School District and is now a partner at Donovan Group, which is a leading school communications company firm, I guess I should say. And so we've got four panelists, but it's okay. We can all fit here inside the sound booth at WASBO Studios. Let me start here um, with Brian. We've done these Money Talks webinars for almost 2 years now, but this one I'm extra excited about. This is going to be a good one, for a change, um, because we've got the extra guests, and I think the information that we're going to share is super timely. Let me do the required information disclosure. The chat is open. It's your opportunity to communicate with your colleagues from around the state. If you have a question to pose, um, you can use the Q&A function as well, just to pose a question. Yeah, usually the leading suggestion we get during the chat is that we find a new host and co-host, but we're going to soldier on anyway. And hopefully we'll get better at this. We are recording this. The recording will be available next week sometime. The slides that we use today are available immediately, well, a few hours after we finish up this morning. Those slides are yours to use as much or as little as you want. You can also find the slide decks from previous editions of Money Talks for the last 20 months or so. So let's dive in. Our first topic is enrollment, which ought to be simple enough, right? But as far as communications goes, this can be an interesting challenge, even at the board level. The third Friday count, as all of you technical experts know, is the residential membership count adjusted for FTE-ness, right? So when you're talking to the school board, you're saying things like, we count the kids who don't go to school here, and we count kids, or we don't count kids who do go to school here, and we count the 4Kers at 0.6, not because they're tiny, but because they go to school part-time, and you're immediately into the weeds, right? So this topic poses kind of an interesting challenge. Here's the macro view, and then we're going to turn this over to the panel for some input. This little line chart shows statewide 4K through 12 enrollment actual through the 23-24 school year, and you can see that the 5-year trend, the actually 6 data points there, shows a downward trend. We're topping out just over 800,000 kids in the 23-24 school year. And then this was done by the APL, Applied Population Lab, by the way. They have 2 projections going forward. These are both taking, they're both projecting off of those 6 data points to the left side of the screen. Under either scenario, a 3 or a 5-year projection, enrollment statewide is expected to continue to decline. That's a national and statewide phenomenon. And so I think we're all just going to have to get used to this in our messaging. So let's focus on enrollment. Our count date is September 20 coming up. So Andy, Brian, how do you approach talking to your board about the enrollment count?
For me in Menasha, it's very difficult. We have a very transient population. So we'll easily have 10% of our population come and go throughout the year. So they always ask, well, what's enrollment going to look like in 5 years? And I'm not sure what enrollment's going to look like in 2 months from now. But we have been seeing, our trend looks exactly like what the graph did. We did do a population study 10 years ago, and it said we were supposed to be gaining 50 kids a year. We've been losing 50 kids a year, so that projection was way off. But our board is understanding, but we also know that we need to keep downsizing. We did close a building this year. We closed another building a couple of years ago. So just keeping up with that enrollment, and we have the door open to potentially closing another one in the future. But yeah, we talk about that, and we do talk about head count because that relates to staffing. And when you put up that slide on enrollment, membership, and head count, I'll be completely honest. I've been in this career for 17 years. They all still I still have to figure out what I'm talking about. I mean, I know head count and I know FTE, but then when you start to get into membership and enrollment, why do we need more terminology? Let's just keep it simple.
Right. How do you approach it, Andy?
In Oregon, we have actually a similar story to Brian a little bit. We were projected to grow over the last several years, and we haven't. We have been staying stable, so that's a little bit of a benefit. Up, down a few students each year is kind of what we've seen. This year we're starting a little bit bigger bump, but as I always caution our staff, you don't know who's not here yet, because a certain number of students, especially at the high school, usually disappear on us, and we need to kind of get to the count number or the count date before we actually figure that out. But Yeah, it's a dilemma when you're declining. I think because, you know, the issue that we have and the districts that have this problem is that as you spend funds, you need to be careful of kind of the perception that you're creating, I think, because then if you're reducing services, you end up with a situation where less people want to come to your school district. So that's an issue. In Oregon, our strategy is actually we've been passing referendums, both operating and capital referendums to make our district a more welcoming place, kind of updated, so to speak. Doing some things with sustainability to try to get people that are interested in those things to come here, but also just for operating expenses in order to have an increase for our staff, to provide some extra services so that people want to come to Oregon. And we're fortunate enough that our community has backed us.
Saying
Isn't
that
it
money does provide happiness.
You heard it. You heard it here first, Brian.
I think it's so frustrating that people equate a district with declining enrollment as a declining district, like you're in some kind of death spiral. You know, it's totally untrue. That's part of the communications challenge. I wonder, Brian Nichols, if you have worked with districts on any of these issues.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Great to be here with WASBO. I've had the great fortune to have worked in my former district in Howard Swamico with three amazing CFOs, Betty Zimdars, Matt Spetz, and of course, Mike Jewett. And I've been here with Donovan Group for 2 years. And the kind of questions we get, you know, around enrollment right now with districts are typically part of a larger picture. You know, how do we talk about that in the context of having operational needs? It's certainly one of the variables, one of the few variables, in my opinion, that a district has to impact its revenue. And that I think is a complexifier for community residents and even for staff, that, you know, we can't go out there and sell more widgets to raise more money to impact our programs or our facilities. We can have students attend our schools, and we can ask the community to consider a referendum. And those are really our two biggest levers. As I think about the enrollment third Friday count conversation, you know, the conversation up to this point has been, you know, the board as an audience, critical audience for sure. But the public and staff really can be audiences for that conversation as well. And while we want to have some sense making on national trends, we want to have some sense making, to Mike's point about declining enrollment not being declining quality, there's an opportunity to educate. What's the board's role in this conversation about enrollment or open enrollment? What process steps does the district have to take statutorily and otherwise to make decisions about these things? Anytime you can elevate that level of discourse, bring some community members and staff along, and having them being better informed about some of the processes that we oversee and that impact our revenue. I think when you have to jump into that, the R word, right, and jump into that referendum conversation, you're starting at a better platform. You know, one of the things that we hear from districts as it relates to thinking about enrollment or potentially a third Friday count is that attendance piece. What does it look like to remind, encourage, and support families in understanding how important attendance is? Certainly for the data that we need and collect and how it impacts revenue, but also just for the students' ability to learn and grow. We do have a lot of districts that are talking to us and asking how, you know, both in general messaging and specifically in campaigns, that we can be talking about in attendance. At the same time, I feel my personal opinion here, taking off my Donovan Group and Howard Swamico hat, is, you know, we can't recruit students that don't exist. The national trends are the national trends, and you're not going to be able to, through the most amazing recruitment and marketing campaign, attract students to your district that simply aren't there. So that's I think we're in the midst of learning and understanding and conceptualizing that as leaders and as boards. So that's a communication challenge moving forward. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask Andy to pass along hello to my colleague Erica. She's one of the best in the business in Oregon, as you well know, and she's a great thought partner on the WISPRA side, right? Our state organization on the school PR side, chewing on these thorny topics all the time, has got a great track record of referendum success as well. So grateful to be here, and I'll share some other thoughts on referendum a little later in the conversation.
Brian, I just
Thanks.
want to take up on something that you said that it's interesting because there's a little side conversation going on in chat too that's interesting on around the vouchers and the homeschool, that it's easy for some outside groups that maybe don't support public K-12 to just say, well, your enrollment's going down because they're all going to homeschool and they're all going to voucher. We're not losing kids, but really we have a kid issue. I mean, people are having kids much later in life, you know, into their late 30s and 40s. When they do have kids, they're having one child. And we all know to keep population, well, maybe we don't all know, but to keep population going, you need to have what, like a minimum of like 1.8 kids or something at minimum, just with the death rates and keeping up with population. So we're not having the 3 to 4 kids. It's interesting, like in Menasha, we looked at our census data and 80% of our population is beyond childbearing. So, you know, what does that mean? You know, if 20% are you know, potential families, I mean, that's a small group. It's not saying that we're going down by 50 a year just because vouchers and homeschool. It's just people aren't having kids, and we need to be having those conversations because those the birth rate trends and everything, it's impacting everyone.
Well, that's a great-
As a 50-year-old father of a 7-year-old, I'm not sure if I'm convicted or seen by your comment, but I absolutely endorse it because I feel it to be true. You know, I think it's fair to engage in the conversation about facts, right? About the factors at hand and what we understand to be true. At the same time, to Andy's point earlier, it's incumbent upon our districts to be able to provide the programming that inspires and attracts families. That doesn't come at an opportunity cost of we can snip a little here to invest a little here, as you well know. Now, on the facility side, it's incredibly more complex. You know, districts are thoughtfully right sizing, but also needing to invest in order to be able to accomplish that efficiently and in a way that can demonstrate responsiveness both to the students and their opportunities and the taxpayers. So it's a complex, multivariate conversation, but it's fair to say, it's fair to inject into that conversation. You know, we know it's 13 kids who are homeschooling in our district of that serves 2,000. We also know that 3 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera, it was a district of 2,500. The math isn't mathing. And what that means is there aren't as many students out there, resident and otherwise, to bring. So how do we serve the ones we have? And how do we inspire others to, when they're searching, you know, consider the Oregons, the Menashas, the Howard Swamicos of the world?
Right. You know, I think that this conversation points, you know, for me to the idea that when you do your third Friday enrollment count, sure, you have to publish a little table that summarizes the numbers, but you have to add some context and some talking points and to you know, help make sense of it for the audience, whoever that audience may be. So, you know, go beyond the numbers. The other thing is that I wanted to mention is open enrollment, which is sort of a first cousin of the third Friday count. This one used to drive me particularly crazy when I was working in Waukesha County area. They had a school board that would just perseverate over open enrollment out, and especially if it was net open enrollment out. They took that as a market judgment by the community on the quality of the schools. Even though 98% of the kids, you know, were at our schools, they still were really hung up on this. And they wanted to do surveys of the people who were open enrollment out, and they wanted to advertise and go through all these motions. And I, after years and years of this, came to the conclusion that we were much better off focusing on our fans and not on our critics. We'd be better off surveying our own students and families and asking, why do you go to our schools? What do you like? What are we doing right? What do you want more of? Instead of chasing somebody who never went to our school in the first place and is just a born critic. So that was my take on it. And I realize there's a lot of opinion built into that take. I'm curious to know how you guys handle open enrollment discussions.
Well, it's a tough one for us because we're 2-1 out, but our board understands that, and we've done everything that you said, Mike. I mean, we've surveyed that out. We get the typical responses. I work in other districts, so I want my kids to go there. I don't understand that argument. There was very little that had to do directly with the district. You know, there was a couple with some behaviors. Our open enrollment ins were, I feel like, more interesting because they talked about our diversity and how kids wanted to come to our district because of our diverse student makeup. And they felt like their home district was a little too, I guess, pale, that they just wanted their kids to have more experience. So I agree with that. You know, our numbers are starting to get better. But again, I don't know if that means that we're doing better if people just want the transportation. And, you know, I'm getting a little cynical. I feel like K-12 is moving more into just daycare, you know, that, you know, we're primary taking care of the kids, and then secondary, we're providing some education.
No, I'm not ready to go that far.
I'll pick up. Yeah, I'll pick up on the daycare thread, and I appreciate your candor and sharing your cynicism. You know, there are districts we are working with who are seeking to solve a community daycare issue by addressing that within district facilities, programming, and again, thinking about that through an enrollment lens. How can we attract and retain staff members for whom they might come here, buy here, stay here, raise their kids here, but then also for others. You know, we know daycare deserts exist. So that's been, let me think, in the last 12 months, we've helped 4 districts with community facing daycare surveys. Really not something that was, you know, the province of schools, you know, 10 years ago, but now they're looking at it as an opportunity through a conversation to help solve a problem where they would also benefit. Complex. I hope some of them, you know, some of those solutions come through and can be models for other schools. As I think about an open enrollment conversation in my former district, you know, we were coming off of our first ever operational referendum question in 2017. It was a loss for us. And one of the items of feedback in that process was an enhanced community awareness of our open enrollment numbers. A pretty big open enrollment in district, Bayport High School and Howard Swamico. And there was some concern about that. You know, if we're asking taxpayers to take on, you know, additional consideration for a levy override, you know, what does that mean for our high numbers of open enrollment? So at the end, board agreed to sort of right size the open enrollment piece of what we were doing thoughtfully. We had a plan built out, and surprisingly to me, the number one critics of that were our staff and some of our leaders. Getting back to Mike's earlier point, numbers are easy to keep a scoreboard on. More must mean better. You know, if your high school enrollment's dropping from that magic, you know, number of 2,000 down to 1,900, what does that mean? Does that mean we're not doing as good? Are we not bringing as many people? So having that conversation internally, inside out communication is so critical. You know, and now, gosh, 6-7 years later, as that number has stabilized, what they found is, okay, now we've got, through, you know, an expiring sibling exemption, for lack of a better term, we've got some class size pockets that have kind of dipped throughout our district. It's still my home district. And so that causes some interesting challenges. So all that to say, I like Mike's other point about, you know, connecting with your fans. We believe very strongly that good news solves a lot of problems. And we also know that sharing good news is an investment. It takes a lot of time and energy to mine those stories, to intentionally share them through your channels, engage your fans and help them share your good news too. But that helps, I think, all conversations, enrollment, referendum, et cetera. So don't shy away from investing time, energy, and resources, and potentially FTE in sharing the good news about your districts. And that is a rising tide that raises all ships.
That's great. Why don't we put on our green visor here for a minute and talk a little bit about the connection between enrollment and budget. I think is a couple of things I want to mention. One, on open enrollment is really volatile. And if and, you know, no one ever recommends that you do a cut and paste budget from the prior year. Obviously, right, line by line scrutiny is what's called for. But if you were to do a cut and paste budget, open enrollment is an area where you can really get clobbered, right? Because a 25 kid swing one way or the other can have a big impact on your budget. And, you know, open enrollment isn't, you know, it's just an area to be really careful with and be conservative in your estimates. And the other thing I want to mention about on the financial side is this does give you a little glimpse into what's coming in October, right? If yeah, I was always really anxious to get these third Friday numbers and start plugging them into the pre-populated revenue limit worksheet, just to kind of see how that was shaping up, so I could sort of preview that for the board. I don't know if Brian or Andy, if you perseverate over the pre-populated revenue limit worksheet like I did, but I think at some point I may have been a little OCD. I think I was running them about once a day between September and November.
I'm always anxious to get the numbers. I was just in our summer school coordinator's office yesterday trying to get the summer school numbers, and
Right.
those are turning out to be better. And I feel like sometimes we're just a pest. How about you, Andy?
Yeah, I'm always curious about it too. But your other comment, Mike, is, you know, your open enrollment can swing your dollars faster than the 3-year average in the residential count. So you got to
Right.
keep an eye on both of those things, so to speak. Summer school is always a good number to figure out what you're doing. If you have a robust summer school, where that's going is important as well. But and those districts that are declining, you know, do have that exemption that gives them a little bit of breathing room for a year or so too. So there's just so many things to keep an eye on. And like I said before, the keeping track of those high school kids sometimes can be the thing that is the surprise for you when you get a week or two into school. So
You bet. Okay, let's move along. We've got to talk about a little bit about October, excuse me, and the annual tax levy. This discussion seems to be getting a little more complex every year. I'll just point out a few things from the slides, and then I'm going to throw it open to our panel here. These issues have risen to the surface really just in the last few years. So first, it's okay to call out the levy impact of the voucher and choice programs. That's a relatively new phenomenon, and it's based on just the size and scope of the levies that are dedicated to funding those programs. And then secondly, in the last, or I should say the current state budget, the 23-25 state budget, the legislature put actually, I think, a little bit more money in school levy tax credits than they did in equalization aid. It was a really big effort to put money into school levy tax credits. And of course, if the money had gone into equalization aid, it would be reflected in lower levies. School levy tax credits are applied after the levy. So those are two relatively new developments. You guys have any issues or any strategies that you can recommend around either of those topics?
I'm actually working on the preliminary budget right now. We're going to be presenting that in, second Monday in September, so real soon here. And I'm actually netting it out, so to speak, so that we can estimate what the actual property taxpayer bill is. We've done a couple presentations on this, but you actually do a pretty good estimate because the information is already known. It's based on prior years, 3 prior years levies of how the money is going to be distributed between your municipalities. So I actually take and do a pretend levy against all the municipalities based on data that's out there. It's a guesstimate because it's based on Department of Revenue information as far as what's happening, and then net out how I think the additional levy funds are going to be distributed. And I did that last huge because you're right, Mike, it was $355 million went into the levy credit last year. This year, an additional 80 million is going into the levy credit. So quite a bucket of money. I think it's over $1 billion now in that levy credit bucket. It was something that we weren't keeping track of because it had been stagnant for so many years. But this biennial budget, significant amount of money was put into it.
It's a policy choice.
Andy, I want to thank you for your work on that. And I know WASBO will be having a webinar in October to talking about this again. The vouchers, we always highlight the vouchers. So we used to be a district was just talking about the mill rate, which we'll talk about next. We've started to move away from that and look at the levy, but this whole levy tax credit and netting it out, it was I don't know, it's kind of like a smoke and mirrors type presentation. And the board, like when you're starting to talk about, enrollment and everything, and then you start talking about this, it's kind of like, well, what is it? And it's like, well, this is what we think it is, and this is what it's going to be. Our board, fully understood it. They were willing to increase the levy. We were trying to keep our levy flat because our taxpayers said that they don't want to have any more increases. So we did use that successfully to do that, but it's another layer of complexity.
Yeah. If you're relatively
one of the
new
things
to these issues, I'll just jump in here for a second. If you're relatively new to this work, I'll just take an extra second to go over this again. We were concerned last year that boards were going to be put in a difficult position of approving tax levies that were maybe, I'll just use an example, 5-6% increases, and really wringing their hands over that. And at the same time, we knew that the net tax levy after the school levy tax credits were applied was going to be much less, maybe a couple percentage points less. And so it seemed a mistake to leave that out of the conversation. And when we told boards that the net impact on taxpayers, which is really what they're most interested in, was going to be different than our gross levy, I think they felt better informed and made better decisions. Go ahead, Andy.
No, I was just going to say the exact same thing. When people actually look at their tax bill, the money that we levy is not the number that shows up on the tax bill because the credit discounts it. So and it's specific to our levy, so it's completely related to schools. That was an argument that was out there, is like, well, this is something the legislature was trying to do and provide tax relief and that type of thing. It's a school levy tax credit. It specifically comes off the line item that talks about the school district on the tax bill.
Excellent.
One of the things that I'm mindful of is the level of expertise and technical knowledge in this room and in this group, and that presents a challenge as it relates to communicating to that, in Menashe's example, 80% I think you quoted of people that don't have a direct connection to the school district anymore. So as I think about that first point, calling out the impact of voucher and choice programs, those zeros and commas may not have a lot of context or make a lot of sense. I think one way to talk about it very clearly is to convert that to FTE of teaching staff. Knowing your total comp and saying the impact of this voucher program is 4 teachers. And what that means for us is the difference between a 3rd grade with a class size of 26 and across the district with a class size of 23. Now, we don't have any ability to change that. It's in state law, but we want you to know that these dollars going out the door represent an opportunity cost for us, an opportunity cost loss. So I think it's to try to distill and tease out some practical so what's from that voucher choice program impact is the best way to continue to engage and have people understand how sometimes the rules, in my words, are stacked against public schools.
Yeah.
It's knowing your community too. Even though that 80% of our population is in childbearing, we know that the vast majority of them support the community and support the school district because they've lived there their whole life. They went to the public school district. So even though that they don't have kids, they still don't like to hear that the school district is having money, removed from that could go to it, especially after we just went through a $3.5 million cut and the vouchers are about $2.5 million. So one could argue if we could have just had that money, maybe we wouldn't have had to cut $3.5 million.
So the challenge here for all the business managers is, level 1 work is getting all the numbers right. But best practice, getting up to level 2, is taking the extra time and effort to think about these things and think about your messaging. And that's what we're trying to get to. It's hard enough, given the compressed time between October 15th and November 1st, just to get the basic numbers right on a budget revision and a tax levy presentation. We get that, but still, the challenge is get to the next level where you take the time to really work on the messaging with your board. Brian, Donovan Brian, we'll ask you this question. Have you been in a situation where you have a school district client that's got has to adopt a tax levy by November 1st, but they have a referendum on the ballot for November 5th? They don't know the outcome of that
I've
yet?
had that conversation this week, and that's a point where I'm very quick to say I am not a member of WASBO. I'm a friend of WASBO, but we would advise you connect right with your CFO, understand what options you have to lead your board to potentially adopt. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology, but contingency scenarios there, because there are some districts that we're working with that have said specifically, we would love to have had more time and brought the question forward in February or April, but we'd like to try to have an impact this year. That's why we're bringing it forward in November. So yes, the short answer to that is had that conversation, gosh, if not yesterday, the day before.
We actually did that twice, Mike, in the last 5-6 years. And Brian's exactly right. You do kind of contingency levies. And you have to set up a process where, based on the vote, you then submit the levy that was approved by the voters, and obviously work with your legal counsel. Bond counsel will give you some advice on that.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, the situation's coming up more and more frequently. Let's move ahead and take a look at the another real interesting communications challenge. This is about using equalized mill rates. I'll just take a minute to set up the situation, but you're probably all of our number crunchers out there can process this, I'm sure, very quickly. Let's take the 23-24 school year in the fictionalized Two Twigs school district located somewhere north of Highway 8. You have a tax levy of $2 million, a tax base of $250 million, and an equalized tax rate of $8 per thousand. Pretty simple stuff. Now, let's look ahead to 24-25. You have an increase of 10% in your levy. You also, by coincidence, have a 10% increase in your equalized tax base without any new construction. So here's what happens. Your levy goes up by 10%. It's now $2.2 million. Your tax base went up by 10%. It's $275 million. And voila, your equalized tax rate stays exactly the same at $8 per thousand. So what we've seen in this situation is some school districts, I think just unintentionally have published the, hey, great news, there's no change in the tax rate, which, as the slide says, implies that there's no change in the property tax bills, or at least it's subject to being interpreted that way by taxpayers who might lead themselves to believe that means no change in my property tax bill. But in reality, in this situation where there's no new construction, the average taxpayer is going to see a 10% increase in their tax bill. And they're going to find that out in December, no matter what you say in November. And this slide is a cautionary tale to say, let's really focus on this and be very wary of relying on the equalized tax rate argument in a case where it's just inflationary. We've had a number of these around the state, and your job as a business official is not to be persuasive, it's to be informative. And sometimes I think we're tempted to lean a little bit more into persuasion. Don't want to do that here. State the facts and try to give the taxpayers the best sense of what's actually going to happen. There was actually a lawsuit in Monroe about this, but it wasn't really the Monroe School District who did it. It was one of those Vote Yes groups that was loosely attached to Monroe. Andy, Brian, any experience with these equalized tax rate issues?
I just want to say with how property values are going up, this is much more dangerous than it used to be in the past, because you have values going up 20 to 30% year over year over year. So if you maintain that equalized tax rate of $8, your levy is going to be going up. So they are going to see property tax increases and big ones. So should be carefully, especially like if you're in a referendum or something and saying that, you know, it's going to stay the same, your mill rate. Well, that doesn't mean that their tax bill is going to stay the same
Yeah.
because the levy.
Just conversation thread in our former district, you know, passed 2 referendums with that no tax rate increase messaging, but we followed that up very quickly with in the formula that affects your property taxes, the school district controls one variable and they control it expertly. We defease debt. We're thoughtful about the impact to taxpayers and the opportunities that we're investing for students. But the other piece of that formula is controlled by the Department of Revenue. And on some level, and for perhaps a majority, but not everyone in our community, the increase in home values represents positivity and the value of an asset. And we believe the school district plays a part in that, right? A quality school district increases the value of your home for obviously a small number of residents who don't ever intend to sell and look at that as an asset that maybe represents a hardship. But I think the messaging that the board is thoughtful and an expert at managing its portion of that equation, its variable in that equation, is something that for those who want to dig in on this topic can resonate. At the same time, to your point, in the recent years with the property value increases being double digits, certainly in our community, we've had to be upfront about that and not have that be the December surprise. And the conversation about how to parse out your property tax bill, how to understand where those numbers are, and to Andy's earlier point, what's not shown on your property tax bill that's also relevant to this conversation.
Right. Right.
The other thing I would say, and we don't need to dive down this hole because it's a deep hole, is the complexity that can be here, right? Like you provided a real simple explanation, but as you get into multi-jurisdictional school districts, the complexity rises and the impact on one jurisdiction can be significantly less than another. In my school district, I'm projecting right now, one small municipalities in our district will have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 14% increases in their school property taxes, while the larger municipality in my district will probably have 0.
That's
Yeah,
right.
we've asked and answered that question. Why do we use equalized values, right? For circumstances like that.
I've seen that as well. I had a district where there was one of the municipalities within the district's levy was within the district's overall tax base was almost exclusively lake property, and their values and it behaved very differently than did the typical sort of city or residential area that was not on a lake. The overall point here, folks, is be careful with this argument. Your real obligation is try to be as fair and transparent and honest as you possibly can. It's your credibility ultimately that matters more than any 1 year's worth of tax bills. So, okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump ahead to operating referenda. Well, here's just a few clips of some of the real headache-inducing issues on the communication side that we all deal with. The first 2 are from the legislature, work last budget go around. Historic investments is usually the term you see. $1 billion for education spending, which is not accurate. It was equalization aid. State aid to schools, slated to increase. People just assume, you're going to get more opportunities. That's more resources. It's not. And of course, the Evers 400-year school funding. What are you going to do with all that money? It just make everybody reach for their jar of Excedrin, trying to work their way through these this fog of information. Brian, we're going to put you in the driver's seat here, Brian N. Why don't you walk us through some of your tips on communicating about these issues?
I will, thank you. And again, I would welcome questions or rabbit trails from Brian and Andy. I've appreciated the opportunity to jump in on topics. of the previous slides. This is content from presentations that I've been had the pleasure to share with WASBO in the last year, and we're going to do versions of this that have a facilities angle coming up yet this fall. So I'll speed run this, and we'll have a chance to see it in other formats too. But as we think about operating referenda in the Donovan Group, working with over districts with over 100 referenda in the last 5 years, we really view that the process and the messaging conceptually for operating and for facilities is largely the same. We want to answer 3 questions. We want to be able to communicate and talk about the need. We want to be able to communicate the process by which the board evaluates that need. And then we want to talk about the solution the board develops to address the need through that transparent and engaging process. The solution in this case is just the ballot language that the board chooses to bring forward to the community. As I think about it in reverse, the referendum ballot question is a solution. And that solution was created with a process that involves any number of transparent community engagement opportunities. It could be a survey. It could be a task force. It could be some pre-board vote on ballot language engagement opportunities. Come out and learn about the budget. Come out and ask questions about why operational needs are a thing for this district right now. And then we want to always focus on the need. You're not advocating, you're not crossing that line when you talk about the needs of your district and the needs of students. You're asking the community to weigh in on whether to invest in those needs. So you're well within your rights and safe to be able to focus on need. You can slide over to the next one. So as we think and support districts in working on a referendum, we really want to focus on a message document. And I know there are some former teachers in the room, and I won't get into too much teacherese as I was a 6th grade math teacher, but when we think about key messages in the context of a referendum, those are your learning targets. Those are your standards. Those don't change. We don't want to halfway through a referendum conversation go, oh, we want to shift our messaging and now it's going to be about this because we think safety is going to be the thing that brings people out, or that we can scare people by talking about cuts. We really want to define and understand those messages created and understood through that transparent process that the board engaged in, so that we can be and empower people to have coherent conversations in our community. Here's the need, here's why, here's where the resources are going, here's what it means for your property taxes. So the messages we want to retain and focus on some discipline and some fidelity. Now, as we think about a communications roadmap, who's going to do what, when, what channels are we using, who are we going to reach and why and how often? Those are the lesson plans, right? Those are flexible. Those change day to day based on how your students are doing. And I think about a community conversation with a referendum as teaching a unit plan. We're teaching 6th graders about fractions. And there are some days where we get it and we're rolling forward. And there are other days where we maybe got the quiz back and didn't do as well as we would hope. So we're going to slow down. We're going to dig in, and we're not changing our messages, but we might emphasize a certain message over another based on the audience, based on the tone and tenor of the conversation. I think often that the key messages as you think of communicating with staff, right? Inside out communication, and communicating with retired individuals in your district. Those messages are relevant to both groups, but one is going to be way more important than the other. Where are the dollars going and how does this impact kids? Is going to be more important on the staff side, likely. How does this impact my pocketbook? I'm on a fixed income. What does this investment mean for me as a community member is going to be more important there. We're going to ask districts, as you well know, to dig deep. And we expect our board members to be communicators. One of the key success determinants, in my view, is the extent to which the board takes a stance of, we study the problem with the district administration's help. We understand the scope of the need. We're proposing this solution to the community, and we want every voter to be an informed voter. I'll contrast that with a sense of that we see sometimes, hopefully not often, of board members going, yeah, we hope the superintendent's referendum goes well, make our jobs easier, right? We hope everything progresses well because, we think it's a good plan. The superintendent really is doing a good job out there, being the face of this. We want to think of board first communication as it relates to referendums whenever possible.
Well, I totally agree with that. I remember we did this calculation some time ago where we were like, if we could add up how many yes vote or how many votes there were to put these 7 people on the board, if all those voters voted yes on the referendum, it would win easily. The board is your key communicator. Those are the people the community trusted and put in office in the first place. Hard to win unless you have, how do I say this? The community can usually sense the enthusiasm of and commitment of the board on an issue like this. And if they sense that the board is bought in and really determined that we need this, they'll go along with it. If the board's kind of lukewarm, the community will sense that too.
Yeah, superintendents and administrative teams rightfully put a lot of time and energy in trying to secure a unanimous vote on ballot language, right? For the reasons that you just stated. And we say often, you know, boards can't advocate for a specific vote, a specific outcome on the referendum, but they can absolutely talk to the community about why they voted yes to bring the question forward. You can talk about your board vote to yes to say, we want you to consider this question. It's a great way to inject the word yes into the conversation, right? We've studied the problem. We understand the need. We know there needs to be a solution. So here's why I support this question. Here's why I support you considering this solution. You're not crossing the line there. It's fair and clear communication. And the more board members and the extent that you've got the board speaking in one voice with that message, I think is a success determinant for referendums. You can go on to the next one. So I could sit and talk about this framework all day. I'll try to be brief about it. When I use the word irrational here, it's not a pejorative term. It is the sense that the irrational yes or irrational no voters aren't going to be moved from their positions. So we consider 4 types of voter personas as we're talking about referendum. I'll use my wife and I as examples of irrational yes voters. If you were to propose a question with a tax impact to solve a problem for our school district, our first response might be, could you raise our taxes more to solve more problems? Could we build that extra elementary school? Could we lower class sizes? You name it, give us the blank check, we'll sign it, right? The good news is you have people out there in your community like that. They're irrational yes voters. You've got their vote no matter what. The bad news is it's a small group. I'll put on the other side irrational no voters. Now, again, it's not a pejorative term, but there are residents out there for whom no solution is going to address the need, or they don't perceive the need as being significant, as being worthy of their time, energy, and resources. That's okay. It may be due to personal finance. It may be increasingly due to political or social perceptions of the district and its priorities. You're not going to win those votes. That is also a minority. It feels like it's an increasing minority or trending toward a majority. It's a loud and vocal minority typically in your district. You're not going to win those votes. Now, the good news is 60 to 80% of your voters out there are rational yes or no voters. And we use the term rational to mean they want to learn. They want to know. They want to consider whether or not the solution and its cost makes sense for them. Does it balance sensitivity to taxpayers and opportunities for students? In my former district, I vividly remember conversations. We engaged in our first ever operational referendum conversation in our community. It was not supported by a 40-point margin. And coming out of that, one of the conversations was, okay, we're going to get a task force together. We want to get people in the room. How do we make sure it's not an echo chamber? How do we make sure it's not all yes voters? And I said, my superintendent, we lost by 40 points. There are a lot of yes voters out there who weren't yes voters. You think they voted yes, but they didn't, right? We need to engage that group differently. Think about how we can move them. So as we think about messaging for a referendum, we want to point those messages towards the rational no voters. What information or context do you need that might help you consider supporting this? And that messaging supports all 4 types of personas. We want to think about those voters who are high info, coming to your community info sessions. They want to learn. They want to find an excuse or a reason to support you. We want to focus messaging on them and that the other groups will benefit.
Brian, that's correct. Usually you can only move one group. Like you can move the irrational no to rational no, but there's still going to be a no. It'd be very, very difficult to move them from irrational no to rational yes or irrational yes. Just too much effort. So usually just one level that you can move someone.
As you get into a campaign, I would say, especially if we advise districts to take the ask me anything approach. I'm sure some people on this call have heard you got any questions, call our CFO, and you get a lot of one-on-one phone calls and go down the well. For me, what we got into in Howard Swamico, and it was a great experience working alongside Mike Jewick and Matt Spetz before him, was how do we identify in the first 30 seconds of a phone call whether this is going to be worth our time? And be respectful, be appropriate, respond with facts. But at some point, you're not going to move that individual. You've got people out there you can connect with that you can. So it becomes a resource allocation question with your time and energy.
Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left. Let's make sure we hit this slide quickly. And there's the last one is one I really want to get to. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just briefly, districts ask us all the time, should we go in November? Should we go in February? Should we go in April? There's good data out there. I know Barrett has modeled some good data that shows some differences, right, in success rates depending on when you go. We say give yourself time to do the process well. Give yourself time to do some community engagement. Understand the scope and support of your needs is the question you're considering. That's going to be a bigger success determinant than trying to, for lack of a better term, game the system for a higher or lower voter turnout. I would say as a baseline, you can never go wrong with the message that we want every voter to be an informed voter, and we want to have the question on the ballot when the most voters are going to come out, because I feel that's a defensible position. As you know, and as you feel, anytime there's turbulence, chaos, political chaos, financial bad news, there are so many things outside of our control, prevailing winds that can impact a referendum. Those are things that, again, truly, hopefully your baseline community engagement is higher so you can withstand some of those changes in the Wisconsin weather, if you will.
If I could, Brian, I got to share my favorite Donovism, and that is never give somebody a stick to hit you with. I love that.
That's a good one.
We talk about that all the time with the Board of Education. We've gone through a number of referendums in the last decade, and it's never maybe the time to start thinking about doing a big change that's going to impact a lot of people's lives right before a referendum. So just think about that as well.
Yeah, how do you clear the playing field for the conversation? The work goes on, the kids are coming, they need to learn, and we love them and support them. And yet, you need to be able to focus, because my superintendent used to say, I didn't go to superintendent school to run referendum campaigns. And yet, it's a crucial part of the job.
That is very, very true. Okay, let's get to final thoughts. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. As we've mentioned multiple times, don't get into advocacy, stay far away from it. One thing we can all advocate for is for every voter to be informed. I think that's a great message. We talked about the board owning the referendum. It's their process, their vote to bring the question forward. We want to make sure that that is something that is clear and we're all on the same page. To Andy's point, don't overreact to social media. There are going to be a lot of sticks in the last 2 weeks that are poking at us. We're going to maintain message discipline. We're going to bring people to the single source of truth, and we're going to have informed voters. We're not going to make any wild shifts in the closing days. We tell the truth. We absolutely address elephants in the room. Every district, I think Brian brought up this point before, every community is so unique in its conversation about public schools. But we do believe what's universal is the love for public schools. So we need to address those elephants in the room, whether it's right sizing the district, other issues that may have come up. We're going to use every tool in our toolbox to get our point across. And this last one is my favorite because it's a head scratcher. It'll be November 2nd, 3 days before the referendum, and you'll have a conversation in the grocery store, at the gas pump. So there's a referendum this year for the school district. I just heard about that. And the mountain's been right here for us for 18 months in some cases. But you take a deep breath and you say, you bet, what would you like to know? What's important to you? Do you want to know how it helps students? Do you want to know how it impacts your taxes? We definitely want you to be informed when you go vote on Tuesday. So don't be afraid to repeat yourself. You will.
Brian, even better than your comment was, we just passed a referendum for a very large 223,000 square foot building, and we're still getting the questions, what's going on there? What's happening? So, well, that was a referendum that passed, and we're building a new building. Oh, okay.
That's great. That's great. Well, hey, I want to thank you, especially Brian Nickel from Donovan Group, for your contributions to this conversation today. Also want to thank—
My pleasure.
You bet. If you want to hear more from Brian, he presents fairly often at WASBO conferences. Andy Weiland at Oregon, thank you as well. And Brian, as always, appreciate having you as the co-host of Money Talks. Just a couple of final comments. A lot of the topics we covered today will be addressed again at the WASBO Fall Conference, which is the first week in October, which is a really great time to set up your strategy for that. We call it Shark Week, or Shark 2 weeks, that period between October 15th and the November 1st levy setting. So we'll be covering this again at the Fall Conference through a lot of different breakout sessions. Look for a webinar on school levy tax credits in October before you set your levy. That will come from WASBO. And finally, I just want to re-emphasize the point that there's a difference between being an accountant and being a school business official. The accountants do the numbers, but you're paid to do the numbers and also provide context and meaning and explain the why to your board and your community. That's where the real leadership comes in. Hopefully we were able to emphasize that. Brian, Nickel, two things I want to end with. One thing really. Thank you for the word. What did you call it?
I like that word too, Mike.
Catastrophe. No, it was complexification. I think that's complexifier.
Complexifier.
That's it. That is a $10 word. I appreciate that.
You won't find it in Webster's. It's probably made up. So I apologize to my high school English teachers.
I'm going to use that one. Hey, everybody, have a great Labor Day weekend and a great start to the school year. We wish you well and look forward to seeing you down the road. Thanks again.